River City Cruises acknowledges the original custodians of the lands upon which we stand, the Turrbal people from the north of the river and the Yagara to the south. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. In front of us is the first of our many bridges on our trip today, named in honour of the late Indigenous Senator Neville Bonner. Bonner was an Australian politician and the first Aboriginal Australian to become a Member of Parliament. The pedestrian bridge links the Cultural Centre precinct and Parklands to the Queen's Wharf precinct. We're fully licensed, so if you'd like to enjoy a beer or a wine or something like that while cruising down the river, just head on down to the bar at the lower deck and see one of our friendly staff, and remember to watch your step as you move around the vessel.
Alrighty folks, thanks for your patience there. Feel free to move around the vessel as you please. Just remember that the boat can move around a bit, so just taking it nice and easy. Doesn't seem to move around too much in the river here, but occasionally we encounter the wake of a city cat or other large vessels, so just taking all care while moving throughout. Now folks, we do have complimentary afternoon tea, coffee and some cheeky little baked goods. They're located on the upper deck there towards the rear of the vessel. For your convenience, feel free to help yourself to those. And also guys, if you have any questions or if there's anything we can give you a hand with, please feel free to reach out to one of us, myself included. We're always around, we're happy to help. Now as for the commentary, I'll leave that up to our commentary guy. His name's Clayton. He's a lot better at it than I am. That'll start up again as we approach the next bridge. Enjoy the ride.
Now we're heading downstream towards our next bridge on our journey, the Goodwill Pedestrian Bridge, which links up Southbank to your right and the Brisbane City Botanical Gardens to your left. Now, these are Brisbane's oldest botanical gardens, and up until 1958 included a zoo known as the Brisbane Zoological Gardens, which housed a wide variety of different species. Now that's the Maritime Museum to your right once we clear the bridge. The museum incorporates the old dry dock facility, which was built in the 1880s. The dock had a lot of use during its early years before improvements in land transportation. However, the significance of the dock, revealed during World War II as Port of Brisbane, served as a major Allied base. Coming up to what we refer to as the town reach of the river. Just ahead we have Brisbane's newest bridge, the Kangaroo Point Green Bridge, which is a steel single-mast cable stay bridge rising to the height of 95 metres. Now, this bridge is one of many pedestrian bridges, part of the Council's Green Bridges program. Been known as the Story Bridge Hotel. The building coming up on your left is the Customs House building, the colonial style building with the green copper domed roof. This 1880s building replaced an earlier and much smaller Customs House on the site. The location was chosen in 1840 1949 following the declaration of Moreton Bay as a port of entry. It served as the city's customs house for around a century, up until it closed in 1988. However, it's now owned and operated by the University of Queensland, and you can visit free of charge on Sundays. Now that impressive structure coming up is the Story Bridge, named after a high-ranking official J.B. Story. It was designed by John Bradfield, the very same person who designed the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now you may have noticed that Brisbane City is a city of many bridges, and you can almost map our economic history by when the bridges were built. Historically, whenever Brisbane's economy takes a downturn, our solution is to build another bridge. And that was certainly the main reason why the Story Bridge was built, as the city struggled to drag itself out of the Great Depression in the 1930s. The Cantilever Truss Bridge employed over 400 people in the 5 years it took to build, and cost around $3 million. On the southern approaches of the Story Bridge is the beautiful Captain John Burke Park. The park is lined with fairy-like coloured fig trees. The name of the park, and the nautical theme of the children's playground in the park, are a visible reminder of the significant maritime history of the area. In front of the park, along the riverbank, there's some plants growing, and these are mangroves. In addition to protecting the land from coastal erosion and storms, mangroves also stabilise the seabed. They improve the water quality by trapping sediment and help absorb carbon in the atmosphere. They're also an essential source of food for many marine animals and are home to many birds, crabs, insects and marine creatures. Between 1974 and 1997, approximately 313 hectares of mangroves were lost in the Brisbane River and Moreton Bay Marine Park. Much of this loss was due to land reclamation for Port of Brisbane. The river was moving at about 10 to 12 knots, well above its usual speed. For comparison, we're currently heading downstream at 7 knots. On your right, we have a little inlet. That was once a dry dock for the Evans Deacon Shipbuilding Company. This is also the same company that built the Story Bridge. From the 1940s to the 1970s, they produced about 82 ships out of that dock. It was all very industrial over that site, with other industry and shipping taking up all the land all the way to the Story Bridge. The dockside and all those other high-rise apartments have only been around for about 40 years or less. Farm. After the convict period of the influx of free settlers, more land was needed, and in the 1860s there were more land subdivisions and the area was divided into smaller tenant farms. In the 1880s, small flats, townhouses, cottages and high-density living were built, and New Farm became our first piece of suburbia. And that trend to density continues through to today. All the locals. The government at the time extended its uses by adding a cricket pitch and other sporting facilities. In addition, extensive rose gardens, jacarandas, figs and poinsettias were planted, and a kiosk and a bandstand were erected in 1915. The park is still hugely popular, especially on weekend and public holidays. Extensive apartments and other high-density residential construction has occurred in the surrounding areas, and the park has become the backyard for the residents. Construction of barbecues and benches underneath the shade of huge fig trees has only added to the community enjoyment of the park. The bandstand still remains and is a popular venue for weddings and other celebrations. Staying on our left-hand side, we have the Brisbane Powerhouse. This powerhouse was strategically built on the eastern riverside point of what is now New Farm Park and utilised the water flow from the river, which helped provide cooling for the powerhouse while the rail line supplied the coal it needed to operate. Distance, there are some old, large lighting towers. That's not the Gabba or the Suncorp Stadium, that's Albion Park Raceway. It's where they have the harness racing for the horses. And I think they still have the dish lickers there, which of course are the greyhounds. From those lights, if you follow up the hill to your right hand side of the hill, you'll see Toorak House. That's the large building up there that looks a bit like a castle. It was built in the late 1800s for the Dixon family, who were property speculators and auctioneers. In fact, James Dixon became Premier of Queensland on 2 separate occasions.
Pontoon that's just ahead of us now to pick up some passengers that we dropped off for an earlier cruise. As we do so, folks, we do ask that you please remain seated, keep your arms, legs and heads inside the vessel, and refrain from using the stairs to the upper deck at this time. Alrighty folks, thanks for your patience there. Once again, feel free to move around the vessel as you please. Just again, remembering that we're aboard a boat, and as you would have seen on the way down river, they can move around a bit, so just taking it nice and easy while you move throughout. Cheers folks, enjoy the ride. I'll be back with you when we're alongside the Cultural Centre pontoon.
River was a favourite for the Aboriginal people who lived along its banks for many thousands of years. Well, their lives changed forever in 1823 when a man named John Oxley first came up the river. John was sent up here from New South Wales to try and find alternative sites for penal colonies. Oxley sailed northwards from the Tweed area on a vessel named the Mermaid. After rounding Moreton Island, arriving at Bribie Island, he came across some shipwrecked castaways, Pamphlet, Finnegan, Parsons and Thompson, who had been living amongst the Aboriginal people there on Bribie Island, around 90 kilometres to the north of Brisbane. With their assistance, an expedition was launched and Oxley found a great site which would eventually become the site of the new penal colony that is now the site of Brisbane City itself. Oxley proceeded to name the area Brisbane after his boss at the time, Sir Thomas Brisbane, who was also the Governor of New South Wales. Now, I don't think it would have hurt his career at all. And if you were wondering how the Breakfast Creek got its name, it's the place where John and his crew stopped for breakfast on their first expedition up the river. The origins of the Brisbane River date back to approximately 14 million years. The source of the river begins at the East Australian Cordillera, commonly known as the Great Dividing Range near Kingaroy, and from here it travels for over 320 kilometres into Moreton Bay. Together with its main tributaries, the Stanley and Bremer rivers, as well as 22 creeks, it has a catchment area of more than 13,500 square kilometres. It's also quite deep. The average depth of our journey is around 12 metres. Our depth is now 10.4 metres mid-Neptune, right here. There are some deeper parts around. The deepest point on our journey is around 22 metres underneath the Story Bridge. The lower reaches of the river are salty and tidal, and if you look along the banks, you can see a bit of a tide stain. We have a tidal range of about 2.5 metres. That's quite a lot of water rushing in and out each day. Old brick buildings on your right hand side there are Queensland primary producers wood stores. Most of the stores were constructed between 1909 and 1915 and in the 1920s. Wool from all over Australia was brought here, mainly by rail. The wool was then pressed, graded, baled and then trolleyed onto the wharves where it was loaded onto ships for export. The buildings haven't been used for that purpose for many years, but they are heritage listed. So in the mid-1990s, the stores were transformed into 66 riverside apartments. See, the developers have been fairly busy along this reach in recent years, and they're still going. It seems like everybody wants to live along the river these days. Well, it wasn't always the case. This river is prone to flooding. Many people did know that right from the early settlers. There's been a dam and many other flood countermeasures put in place since then. This seems to have lulled us into a false sense of security. And I think that sense of security is gone now, as a lot of factors have come into play for the river to flood. Brisbane has been built on a floodplain, and I think maybe the best thing we can do is look at the design of a house in flood-prone areas. Maybe build up more on stumps. A little like the old Queenslander style houses. Now, actually I'll show you a great example of a Queenslander a little further upstream. Up until around 40 years ago, this river was mostly used for industry and industrial haulage. All that has changed now, with all that industry either gone or moved up to the mouth of the river. Brisbane's most prestigious addresses are now found alongside the river. To the right of the vessel, you can see a single-storey timber cream-coloured residence which is called the Amity. a heritage-listed detached house built in 1892 for a man named Thomas Welsby. Welsby was a prominent businessman, politician, historian and sportsman who started his early career as a bankman and proceeded to operate many maritime ventures. Amity was the name of the first ship to carry European settlers to Queensland after John Oxley recommended Redcliffe in Moreton Bay as a suitable location for a penal colony. That's my favourite house coming up there on the left hand side. I'm talking about that beautiful cream house on the left just about now. It's called Federation House. It was built in 1901 and you can call this one a classic Queenslander, albeit a very large one. Now the quintessential Queenslander is made of timber construction with a corrugated iron roof. They're all high set with that characteristic wide veranda that extends all around the house, often with the wrought iron lacework around the verandas. The Federation House, sold to Gina Reinhardt, mining magnate and Australia's richest woman, who bought the property in August 2014 for $18.5 million. The house then underwent a major renovation, so it must be a fixer-upper for Gina. All the large buildings there on top of the hill are a part of Lord's Hill College, a very exclusive all-girls school here in Brisbane. Now back on our right is the Brisbane Tramway Powerhouse, built in the 1920s. The power station did not only help expand the city's tram network, but also generated power and lighting for the suburbs of Brisbane. However, the tramway was decommissioned in 1971, thus beginning the spiral into dereliction. Hordes of squatters and artists made their home amongst the dangerous industrial structures and left a legacy of graffiti on the building, which you can still see today. It is now officially known as heritage-listed aerosol art. The powerhouse is also home to one of Brisbane's many subterranean World War II bunkers. The heritage-listed original structure has been redeveloped and converted into a performing arts complex and dining precinct, yet retaining the strength and the simplicity of its original form. The powerhouse is an important landmark on the New Farm Peninsula, visible from both the Humbug and Bulimba reaches of the Brisbane River. Also over there on the right is the beautiful New Farm Park. The area on which New Farm Park now sits was once covered with rainforest and scrub and shallow lagoons and water holes. And many of the lagoons were filled with turtles. The Aboriginal name before it was New Farm was Beacon Bar, which means place of many turtles. Now if you look just ahead of us, there are some more large lighting towers. These are the lighting towers for the famous Gabba cricket grounds. It's also the home to the Lions AFL team. Now, the reason it's called the Gabba is because it's situated in the suburb of Woolloongabba. Experts are divided to the meaning of this name, which is said to mean either place of whirling water, as it was all built on a swamp, or fight talk place. Many Aboriginal cultural activities and celebrations, ceremonies and tournaments and fight talk and law-making is said to have happened here. Now it's hard not to notice that very large pink house coming up on the left-hand side. Now that's a private residence, Le Rivage, and yes, it has always been that colour. The mansion was originally built for wealthy businessman Keith Lloyd, who made his fortune by building small ships at Bulimba. Lloyd reportedly spent around $12 million in the construction of the mansion, and public records show that the property was last sold in 1993 to businessman Conrad Lynn for $6.8 million. The sale of the property was a record-breaking acquisition in Brisbane at the time, and it was once considered the most expensive house in the city. However, not too sure what it could be worth now. There are a couple of military-style buildings over to our right, painted that reddish-brown colour. They're called Quonset huts. They were originally built as an officers' club for soldiers returning at the end of the Second World War. And during this time, Brisbane played host to more than 1 million American servicemen. It was a vast number, seeing as the local population was only around 300,000. This apparently caused quite a lot of problems, as the American servicemen were said to be overpaid, oversexed and overhere. The American soldiers were paid twice as much as their Australian counterparts, and their dress uniform was said to be much more stylish than that of the Australian officers. The current Brisbane population is around 2.69 million, covering an area of 15,842 square kilometres. It's the most populous city in Queensland, the third most populous city in Australia. The stretch of this river is called the Humbug Reach. Humbug was a slang term used in the 1800s by the mariners whose sailing ships became becalmed on this stretch of the river due to the uncertain behaviour of the tidal currents around this part of the river. And ships used to be towed upstream to even be able to reach the city wharves. However, you won't have to worry about that today on your journey. This vessel you're on is the MV Neptune. She is of all timber construction, built by Hugh Morris right here in Brisbane in 1966. She has a spotted gum hull and now runs a John Deere main engine. Rare turn-of-the-century riverside park close to the city, Mowbray Park. The park was set up for recreational use, and of the facilities erected in the following years, the boat shed, croquet and bowls club remain to this day. Just before the City Cat Terminal, you can see some steps and a handrail leading into the river. These are heritage-listed steps that once led down to the public swimming baths. The public baths were built and operated from 1919 to 1941. I don't think there were too many backyard pools during this time, and with the heat we get here in Brisbane, the baths would have been a very popular spot. The baths were closed and then mostly demolished in 1941 after years of occasional flood damage, vandalism and ever worsening river pollution. The safety of the fencing was also questionable after several bull sharks measuring almost 2 metres were reported inside the enclosure. Now to your right hand side is our replacement Riverwalk. The original Riverwalk caused quite a bit of chaos during the 2011 floods. A large section of the city's Riverwalk began breaking apart and floating away downstream, and two tugboat pilots managed to guide the 150-metre long section of concrete boardwalk safely past much of the city's main infrastructure, including gateway bridges, chemical and fuel wharves, and an oil pipeline near Luggage Point. Today, salvaged sections of the old Riverwalk now form part of the new pontoon at Sandstone Point Hotel on the Palmerston Passage, just north of Brisbane. Continuing on our right are the Howard Smith Wharves. The heritage-listed wharves now boast a large selection of restaurants, boutique hotel, green spaces, and Felons Brewery, which is named after the 4 felons that Oxley found shipwrecked on Bribie Island. Originally called Brisbane Central Wharves, they were constructed in the 1930s as a project by the Queensland Government to provide relief work during the Depression. The Brisbane Central Wharves were later leased to the shipping company Howard Smith Co Limited. Those big red figurines on your left are some of the remaining artworks around the city left over from World Expo 88. Expo was immensely successful for Brisbane as it cemented Brisbane's place on the map and helped breathe new life into the CBD and Southbank, taking the city from a rough shipping area to a thriving community hub. Expo attracted 18 million people to the precinct during its 6-month run, and it also showcased the area's potential as a public space. And coming up, we have the Captain Cook Bridge, which was completed in 1972. The bridge is a multi-span, precast, pre-stressed concrete free cantilever bridge, which is a mouthful. It was one of the longest of its kind in the world at the time, and the bridge is Queensland's busiest traffic bridge, with more than 1 million vehicles crossing it weekly. next development we see on our right is Queen's Wharf, which is set to cost $3.6 billion. Built by Star Entertainment Group, this 12-hectare precinct will be a game changer, creating a vibrant new tourism playground within the CBD that will include the restoration of 9 heritage buildings within the site. It will also include the largest casino resort in Australia, over 50 restaurants and bars, public green space and many high-end retail shops. The heritage-listed Treasury building, just a little further along, which is currently houses the Treasury Casino, will also be transformed into a high-end department store. Is the Victoria Bridge. There have been several versions of the bridge. However, the original bridge was built in 1864 as Brisbane's first road crossing bridge, which connects the north and south banks of the river. Now, if you take a look to the left, you'll see remnants of the 4th version of the bridge, an old brick wall abutment. Before construction of the bridge, trips were made by ferry as early as 1843. The area to your left was originally named Kurilpa by the Turrbal people who first inhabited the area. The indigenous name translates to place of many rats, referring to the water rats which once called this place home. The stretch of the Brisbane River around Kurilpa Point was used as a crossing point and also a place of meeting and trade for the Aboriginal people. Now, looking back to our cultural centre pontoon, you can see the pylons which the pontoon is attached. Now, this gives you an idea of the height of our most recent flood. Now, if you look at the top of the pylon, you'll see white pointed caps. Now, these caps were all that were visible at the peak of the flood levels. Our pontoon was one of the few lucky ones to survive the flood, with many being lost downstream. All around Southbank precinct there are dated flood level markers, and these are small brass markers which are set in the walkways around Southbank.